Hey everybody, my name is Gavin Kennedy, and today I will be presenting on AppArmor and HTTPS as part of Cyber 4220. We'll be looking at what these technologies are, why they matter for system security, and the best practices for hardening them in both Linux and Windows environments. All right, and here is a roadmap for this presentation. First, we're going to cover AppArmor and specifically what it is, why it matters, and any hardening recommendations for it. And then we will be looking at HTTPS, also what it is, the differences between HTTP and HTTPS, and how to configure it securely. And then after that, we're going to dive into IIS on Windows and Tomcat for Linux with overviews for each and any hardening recommendations for both. And then finally, I will wrap up with some closing comments. All right, and so the overview of AppArmor. AppArmor is a Linux kernel security module that implements mandatory access control, or MAC. Unlike traditional discretionary access control, Mac enforces stricter security policies at the kernel level, and it restricts programs to a defined set of files and capabilities using application-specific profiles to enforce the least privilege. And AppArmor is considered easier to configure than SE Linux and is widely used in Ubuntu and Debian systems. All right, so now let's look at some hardening recommendations for AppArmor. So the first one I suggest is everybody should be setting profiles to enforce mode instead of complain mode. Enforce mode actually blocks any unauthorized actions. Second would be to create any custom profiles for critical applications such as Apache or MySQL, and that tailors them to only what the application really needs. And thirdly would be to regularly audit any logs, either in the var log, syslog, or through audit. And this detects any denied access attempts or suspicious activity. All right. And in order to verify AppArmor's configuration on any server, you can run this command that I'm showing. It would be sudo apparmor underscore status. And what this would show would be the total number of profiles loaded, which of them are in enforce mode, which of them are in complain mode, which processes have profiles applied, and this is a command for validating any server configuration during any of our lab assignments. All right, and so now we can transfer over to HTTPS. So what is it? Well, HTTPS stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol Secure, and this is to encrypt standard HTTP traffic using TLS or SSL. And the purpose of this is to protect against any eavesdropping, man-in-the-middle attacks, and any data tampering. And the default port for HTTPS is 443, which compared to HTTP's default port is 80. And using HTTPS ensures any authentication, confidentiality, and integrity for any modern web applications. All right, so first in this section, we're going to actually hop over to Windows with IIS. What is IIS? It stands for Internet Information Services, and this is Microsoft's web server for the Windows operating system. It supports multiple protocols, some of which we just talked about, like HTTP, HTTPS. It also includes FTP and SMTP and a whole bunch of other ones. One of its major strengths is the integration with Active Directory and Windows Security. and IIS is most commonly used for ASP.NET applications, enterprise level websites, with the HTTPS running on port 443 using TLS or SSL certificates. And some hardening recommendations for this. First one would be to disable any of the weak protocols and ciphers like SSL 2.0, SSL 3.0, and TLS 1.0. Only allow TLS 1.2 or 1.3. Second would be to remove any of the unnecessary modules like CGI, ISA API, or WebDAV if it's not required. Thirdly, would be to restrict any of the permissions. For example, running applications under the application pool identity instead of privileged accounts. Fourth would be to hide server headers by removing the xpowered by version info to reduce any exposure. The fifth would be to enable logging and monitoring suspicious HTTPS traffic. And lastly, to enforce HTTPS site-wide and configure HSTS to prevent protocol downgrades. All right, so now I'm going to move over to Linux, and for this, I've chosen Tomcat. So Apache Tomcat is a open source application server that implements the Java Servlet, JSP, WebSocket, and Java EL specifications. It's often used for the Java-based enterprise applications, and by default, Tomcat listens on port 8080 for HTTP, and then for port 8443 for HTTPS, which you would configure in the server.xml file. And Tomcat is a lightweight compared to the full Java EE servers like Wildfly or Web Server. All right, so some hardening recommendations for Tomcat. The first one would be don't run Tomcat as a root. Instead, you want to create a dedicated non-privileged user for it. The second one would be to secure the server.xml file by disabling unused connectors and weak SSL/TLSS ciphers. The third one would be to enforce the HTTPS with strong TLSS certificates and redirect all HTTP traffic to HTTPS. Fourth would be to remove any of the default apps, for example, Doc, Manager, and Host Manager, unless it's absolutely needed. The fifth one would be to disable server banners to prevent version disclosure. And sixth would be to restrict file permissions using least privilege. And the last one would be, of course, keep both Tomcat and Java updated to patch any vulnerabilities as quickly as possible. All right, and the last thing I'm going to go over is just a little tidbit. HTTP versus HTTPS. It's super important to understand why HTTPS is required. So for HTTP, it is unencrypted and it runs on port 80, which makes it vulnerable to any sniffing or session hijacking. And HTTPS, on the other hand, will encrypt traffic using TLS or SSL running on port 443. So because of this, HTTPS prevents attacks from intercepting sensitive data and is required for any secure modern web application. All right, so in this presentation, we covered AppArmor and how it provides mandatory access control on Linux. some hardening steps such as enforce mode, creating custom profiling, and monitoring any logs. We also reviewed the check status using AppArmor underscore status command. And then we looked at HTTPS, its role in securing communications. And then we also looked at some servers for it, such as IIS for Windows and Tomcat for Linux, going over the functions and hardening recommendations for it. And then finally, we went over the differences between HTTP and HTTPS. All right. Thank you guys so much for watching.